Oh, wow. Today I'm going to be talking about monsters. Specifically, I want to talk today about the monsters we create and the ways that they create us. Now, usually when I tell people that I study monsters, they ask me a question that you're probably thinking, does she think that monsters really exist? And I think that's a pretty good question, and it's a question that has not only been asked to me, but it's actually been asked to most monster theorists. And the person that I want to talk about today is Jeffrey Jerome Cohen, who's my favorite monster theorist. And Jeffrey Jerome Cohen asks this question in his text, Monster Theory, and he says, do monsters really exist? And his response is, surely they must, for if they did not, how could we? Now that's a really interesting response, because when I think about monsters, I think that we create them, and not the other way around. So what could Jeffrey Jerome Cohen possibly mean when he says that we need monsters in order to exist? So maybe one way of answering that is to think about how we construct ourselves as humans. So this is a silly example of subject construction. There's me, and there's not me, the other. And in this case, the other is a very scary vampire from Daybreakers. And so in this case, I construct myself through creating a border where I know where I end. I know that I am not the scary monster. And I actually construct this sort of psychological border. So that's all very well and good. I'm me, I'm not the scary monster. But I use the example of a vampire. And as you all know, it's very easy to become a vampire. All it takes is a bite, and I can become this, not precisely this one, but similarly a very scary monster. So this means that we need to think a little more carefully about how we're constructing ourselves. So let's look at another more in-depth example of a monster in order to figure out what precisely monsters are doing in order to construct us. So some of you might know this lady. This is Willow from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, a very fantastic television show from the 90s. And Willow is not the Vampire Slayer, she's a friend of the Vampire Slayer. And she is usually not the one out slaying, she's usually in the library researching. She's very sweet and dorky, and at least in the first few seasons, she's virginal. I'm not done yet, so I don't know. I've been told. This is all well and good, except in one episode in season 3, and I'm not ruining anything because it's not static, but in one episode, she gets vampirized in an alternate universe. And this is Vampire Willow. And Vampire Willow is very powerful. Everyone listens to her because she's extremely sadistic and lascivious. She wears these really tight, sexy goth clothes, and she revels in torturing humans and killing them. So this is bad. The explicit relationship of good Willow to demon Willow is pretty clear. You don't want to become that. We don't want Willow to become demon, and we don't want ourselves to become demons either. But there's an underlying explanation and examination of what I'm talking about with demon Willow. If we think about what demon Willow is, she's a powerful woman. She's a sexually powerful woman. These are things that aren't necessarily bad, right? I want to be a powerful woman. So, so the point to take away is that there is the explicit surface that monsters are scary and bad, but we need to go underneath to think about what we're turning into our monsters, because, as you remember, it's really easy to become a monster. Not literally, but it's very easy to become these things that we are prohibited from becoming. So this construction of the other, of the monster, is something we need to think about. And it's something that Judith Butler is thinking about in slightly different ways, because she's not thinking about monsters, she's thinking about non-normative gender. But if we look at this quote, it sounds sort of like she's talking about monsters, right? She says, "It is the inhuman, the beyond the human, the less than human, the border that secures the human in its ostensible reality." So if we look at this, she's saying something very similar to what Cohen said in the beginning of my talk. She's thinking about the ways that we construct ourselves in relation to others. But Butler is very interested in who these others are. She's thinking about trans people. She's thinking about people with non-normative genders, people who are constructed in our society as inhuman and less than human, people who don't have rights. So this is very, very important. And I want to go to a couple of examples of monsters again to think about how we can use Butler's examination of the other in order to understand our pop culture examples. So this is Nosferatu. This is a screenshot from the film of 1922. Nosferatu is Dracula, but the same story, but they couldn't get the rights for the name Dracula. They didn't pay for it. So here's Nosferatu. And what you can notice about Nosferatu is that he doesn't look human. He's very scary looking. He has this sort of rodent-like quality. And so he's very scary, but what we can think, if we do a little bit of research in the early 20th century about what the racialized problems were at the time, you can discover that Nosferatu, and in particular sort of rat-like qualities, were related to anti-Semitic caricatures of Jews at the time. So we have some temporal distance on this, and you can do research and you can figure this out. You can read the documents, you can look at anti-Semitic depictions of the time, and you can see that this depiction of a monster is related to these anti-Semitic discourses. But what about something that we're dealing with today? This is Edward Cullen from Twilight. He's the romantic vampiric lead of Twilight. He's a vampire, but he doesn't feed off of people. He's a vegetarian. He feeds off of animals. That's strange. But he's in love with Bella, who is a human. And the explicit storyline is one of romance. He and Bella love each other so much, they're all consumed by love, they can't stand to be apart from each other, et cetera, et cetera. And teens love this. So do others. And more importantly, people are very compelled by this character because he loves Bella so much and he would do anything to protect her. He would, it goes on. So, but if we look at the implicit understanding of what this relationship is, as some of you may know, the reason why Edward Cullen loves Bella so much is because her blood sings to him. And what that means is that she smells better than any other human he's ever encountered. And I'm not talking about perfume. He wants to eat her and kill her more than anyone else. So what seems on the surface to be this incredible romance between, interspecies romance turns into this very bizarre relationship of desire and control. He must control himself at any moment because if he falters, he could kill the woman of his dreams. And so because of that self-control, he becomes all-controlling of his lover, of Bella. He is the beautiful, perfect, powerful one, and she's clumsy and incompetent and doesn't think she's pretty. So, and so what I want to take from this example is, again, reading our monsters, the implicit understanding of what these pop culture references mean to us. So I'm going to throw up some pictures of some of my favorite vampires. There are a bunch of different ones. And what I want to end with is just when we look at these monsters, when we're watching monster movies and vampire movies in this example, you can watch them and have fun with them and say, this is a scary monster, or that monster's not scary. But I also want you to take away from this talk that you should read your monsters and think, what is being demonized here? What are the things that we're afraid of that we're putting into these monstrous bodies? Because, as you might remember, when we construct these monsters, what we're really doing is constructing ourselves. So when we look at these monsters, if we deconstruct them a little, we can start to think about how we create ourselves. Thank you.